Hello, and welcome to Skeptic's Forge. I'm Phoenix Nightingale. Now, I did say in my last video that I was going to start covering apologetics, and I still plan to, but considering the fact that the way I think is a little different from most others, I tend to create a model in my head and then work from there using that model, and I keep tweaking it. This is essentially the blade that I'm forging, of my mind. So you start off with the basic laws of logic, law of identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. Those can basically be summed up as something is what it is, it's not what it isn't, and something can't be both what it is and what it isn't, nor can it be neither what it is and what it isn't. And that pretty much sums it up. But those are such a cornerstone of logical reasoning. You can't even construct a coherent thought without it, much less argue against it. Go ahead and try to argue against the laws of logic without using the laws of logic. You just can't do it. They're as much a part of our reality as anything else, and some may argue whether or not they're transcendent or not. I am not going to even go there. I would say that they're a part of this reality that we exist in, regardless of whether or not it's imposed onto our reality from outside or it is an emergent property of reality as it is. I have no idea, but they are there. They're real. First, law of identity, right there. They exist. And of course, there's the four reactions to any given claim. You can accept it as true, you can reject it as false, you can say you have no idea one way or the other, or that you don't even care. Now, I bring this up, I mentioned this before my last video, but I bring this up again because it brings me to the key aspect of how I think, a scale of confidence. Now imagine you have zero confidence on one end and you want to move on towards, determining whether it's true or false. Now, you're never going to just react and say 100% it is 100% true regardless of, you're always going to have some reservations. If you're absolutely certain of something, you've closed yourself off to all possible argumentation to any other conclusion, regardless of how immense the evidence to the contrary may be. And that's of no use to a skeptic. Peter Boghossian labeled that as being doxastically closed, or just closed-minded. You can be closed-minded. Open-minded is where you're willing to change your mind after you've settled on something, and of course there's so open that your brain falls out, which is where you'll accept something as true without even having good evidence for it, and regardless of whether or not it even contradicts what you already know to be true, or at least believe to be true. So from having, from having no idea to being completely true, we'll call that a scale of 0 to 100. And from there, we'll end up having, at some point between having no idea and being convinced, there is a point where, having absolute conviction, there is a point in between where you become convinced, where you're more convinced than you're not. We'll call that the 50% mark. So 0 to 100% with a 50% point in the middle where you start saying that you're convinced. That's how I always view things. It's going to be anywhere in that range between true and false. Maybe between no conviction one way or the other to being convinced. And since true and false is an actual dichotomy, you can put that on the same line of the scale, and now you go from your, instead of going from, let's see, which way was I doing this again? 0 to 100. Having the camera really throws me off because it shows things essentially mirrored. So it shows things flipped around for your views. Okay, so let's do this again. So from 0 to 100, there we go. Now we can actually go and make that negative 100. So we can put false on one end, true on the other, and get a full scale with 0 in the center and our two 50% marks, and then the 100 beyond that. It's a nice way to visualize things, and it's very reminiscent of Richard Dawkins' scale, his 7-point scale, where I believe 1 is absolute conviction of being a theist, and 7 being absolute conviction of being an atheist, that there absolutely is no God, or at the 7 end, or that there absolutely is a God on the 1 end. And then the 6 and 2 would be your in the ballpark of the above 50%, but not at 100. Your the next ones in, of course, would be the not convinced one or the other, and then you have a true neutral at 4. So, and then and then Anthony Magnabosco created his own scale, which is 0 to 100. He only deals with that 0 to 100. That where are you in the conviction that it is true? I like to go, like I said, I go the full scale, positive and negative. But there's more to it than that, because that is just your confidence and belief. That you believe that it's true, that you believe it's false, that you believe that you're not leaning one way or the other on your scale of belief. But then there's also the fact that that's not good enough. Belief does not have any bearing on whether or not anything's true, unless you're using faith, which I'll basically define as belief that belief is evidence. Which really doesn't do anything. It's a circular argument. Faith is a circular argument with that definition. And if somebody wants to use a different definition, I'll go with whatever the definition they are using, so long as they don't switch up what their definition is mid-argument. That's an equivalency fallacy. And so, yeah, knowledge we can put on the same, 0 to negative 100 to 100 again, but we'll put that on the vertical of the whole scale. We have our normal one across for belief. We can put knowledge right there on the vertical, and then evidence can be put along the z-axis. Now, for the knowledge end of things, that's going to be at 100. Again, the 0 is going to be non-committal one way or the other. The 50% marks, positive and negative, are going to be your point of conviction, where you're more convinced than you're not. For the positive end of that, you're going to be at you do have knowledge. These can basically say a claim of belief for the horizontal, a claim that I believe it's true, claim that I believe it's false, claim that I believe there is knowledge, claim that I have knowledge, sorry, not claim that there can't be any knowledge on the negative end of that. And as far as the evidence goes, it's evidence for or evidence against. So skepticism moves in an interesting way with this. You have to have the evidence before you claim knowledge, and you have to have knowledge before you'll be moved on belief. So you can actually have a full scale of things, the full spectrum of belief, but we're not, as a skeptic, I'm not going to move on the belief scale until I also have knowledge. So if I decrease in the knowledge down there to where you can't know, I'm stuck dead center. I'm not moving one way or the other, I'm dead center at 0 if I cannot have knowledge on something. But if I do have knowledge, I'm not going to stay dead center, because the knowledge is going to show one way or the other. So I'll get a Y on the two-dimensional scale. But we move into a third dimension, it's going to be, okay, I have knowledge for the claim. I'll move up and towards that way. Or I'll end up having knowledge against the claim, in which I'll pull back and come up on this side here. I know it's a little bit confusing. I'll eventually come around to generating a graph or something for you guys to work with. No, well, at least so you can see the visualization in my head. It's much, much neater in my head. Doing this with hand gestures is a nightmare. But this is how I visualize everything. Every argument that somebody makes is to move the person they're delivering the argument to somewhere on that scale. They're delivering evidence. Okay, we're moving forward and back. And that evidence is, evidence supports argument, and encourages belief. That's the normal sequence of things. If somebody just makes a broad statement, it's belief with no knowledge, no evidence. If they're giving an argument but not backing it up, then it is just pure rhetoric. It tries to push you one way or the other, this way, but without the evidence to back it up, you can't move with it. Now, there's a lot of common terms that get tossed around with theistic, atheistic communities and with their arguments, and there's a lot of misconceptions that are tossed out. So first off, theism is simply the belief that there is a God. It's a broad category term with many subcategories, and I'll get into those in a little bit. But atheism simply is, if theism is the belief that a God exists, atheism, with a being the prefix of not or without, it is without a belief in a God, plain and simple. So on that scale, a lot of people want to go, from, we have the -100 to 100. I'll put theism at the 100, I believe. With -100, there is no God. And just say, this is theist, this is atheist. But in reality, atheist is actually the 50% closer to this end. That point of conviction. You have not crossed that point of conviction. And then everything this way. This is what atheism is. Not just the back end, not just the point of conviction either, for the -50 to -100. It is that whole spectrum from the not convinced, strong leanings towards but not convinced, all the way to absolutely convinced that there is no God. That is what atheism is. It's a very broad spectrum. Now you have strong atheism, which just includes that ladder bracket over here, the above 50 to 100% on the negative end. That's strong atheism. The in-between for being not convinced one way or the other, that is soft atheism. And that's where I stand on most definitions of God, depending on your definition of a God. If it's self-contradictory or requires me to throw out a large number of the things that I already accept as part of reality, that I do have evidence for, then I'm going to say that that version of a God is not true. And I'll take the strong stance on that. But otherwise, I'm going to be in the soft atheist spectrum there. Now, there's also the common misconceptions of, you just want to sin. You just want to be your own God. That's not atheism, because in that case, suddenly now you're going into the realm of thinking you have to be a God. that you have to believe there's a God in order to reject him and defy against him. That's not atheism, because then I'd still be a theist who's just rejecting, obedience to that deity. But I would still believe. That's not what an atheist is. Not at all. So it doesn't make any sense. Now, a lot of you are probably going, what the hell? I thought that in between was agnosticism. You have theist on one end and atheist on the other, and that the middle ground was where you weren't one or the other was agnostic. No, agnostic is on the scale of knowledge, the vertical scale. So the root word Gnostic, that is, it pertains to knowledge. So if you're saying you're a Gnostic, not agnostic, a Gnostic, that's you saying you have knowledge. That would be the above 50 to 100 range. Agnostic would be everything below that. So just like atheist covered the 75%, agnostic, again, there's that prefix, not, without. Without knowledge, not having knowledge, is everything from the on the fence to not having anything. So, yeah, there's that common misconception right there. Secular is another term that needs to be brought up. That is holding, on principle, dead center on the graph at the 0 point. Even if you do have belief one way or the other, leanings one way or the other, you have arguments to support or detract from it, you have evidence to support or detract from it, whichever, you still hold at that 0 point, no leaning one way or the other, for any version of a God, for any version of religion, whatever. You, on principle, hold all your actions in statements on that 0 point. That's what secular is. That's what our government is. So that no matter who practices what, which version of whichever religion, we have like 3,000-4,000 religions practiced around the world. There's like, I think 1,300 different versions of Christianity already, several denominations, each with their own different interpretations of the nature of God, how he interacts, and how to worship him, how to pray to him, how to be saved. There's so many myriad of combinations that you start supporting one, you automatically ostracize all others. So our government is secular by nature, by its founding principles. Okay, if you want to argue against that, there you go. Founding myth by Andrew Seidel. Sorry, there we go. That will spell that out better than anything else anything I could ever say. As you have a constitutional lawyer who makes a living defending your right to believe by defeating people who are trying to post their own version of religion up in court. So he knows what he's talking about. He's done his homework. I'd advise going through that one. Yeah, and I've already explained skepticism on this. So the terms for the different types of theism, theism can be loosely stated as a belief in a god or gods, but it also can be defined as the belief in a singular God. So you have, let's go with, say, pantheism first. Pantheism is basically equating the universe to God, nature to God. They're one and the same. All you're doing is With the laws of logic, if you have something, here, we'll move it off to the side. If you have something that you're going to label the universe, now suddenly you're labeling that thing God. Has that thing actually changed? No. You have done nothing um, to add to your knowledge. You haven't done anything to redefine how you think or how you see the world. You just simply taken something that everybody else already accepts as, say, as the universe or nature, and now you've just changed out the label of it. That's all pantheism really is. Then you have deism. Deism is the belief that some supernatural entity created this reality that we live in. And that is a simple, start it all off, let it all go, no involvement past the creation point. Theism, in this respect, and as opposed to the broader definition of the term I've been using before, and you always need to make sure that you are differentiating which version of that you're actually using. But theism, in this regard, to differentiate the different types of theism, is when that God takes an interest in his creation and continues to interact with it. And that's where you get the differing religions, where they actually have the dogma of the history of God interacting with the people and actively doing things. That is theism. Polytheism is multiple deities, where that overarching roles that the singular God would take is now divvied up amongst several entities. And sometimes also aspects of nature are given the role of maintaining some degree of order, such as karma and the threefold law of Wicca, for example. Reincarnation is also another thing that gets tossed out there as part of a natural cycle, the supernatural cycle, to maintain a degree of order. The last thing I want to cover before I actually switch over to working on starting on the first book of apologetics here is that there's a burden of proof for any given claim. Whether you're saying something is true, something is false, with skepticism, where you're actually including not just a belief, but the knowledge and evidence. You have to have the evidence to back up the arguments, which will then back up the claim of your belief. So, first off is you have to show that there is something supernatural in the first place, that supernatural is even a thing. Because, well, I don't even know how to get started on that, because we have all of nature. And inside of nature is this little tiny little web of linkages of things that we've observed, things that we have come to understand about it. And suddenly we make an observation of something that's just outside of what we understand. Now, it could be something that we find out that we do know the underlying things to it, we just haven't made the link to it just yet. We have, say, if we have some branches of our knowledge here, and we're focusing on this end, and something we spot tends to be over here, we'll have to trace back and come up again to figure out that we do know it, but it's going to be a mystery until we do. Or we're going to have to, if it's completely outside of our currently existing knowledge, we have to wait until our knowledge of nature extends and grows to encompass that thing before we understand it. But when somebody says it's supernatural, now they're saying there's something outside of nature, beyond our ability to observe, to understand, that is influencing physical reality, and that is the explanation for it. But the only means that we have of examining nature is through nature. We are part of nature. Everything we observe is a part of nature. The thing that we just witnessed that we don't have an explanation for is a part of nature. And the more we've come to learn and grow as a people through science has always been nature. We have no way of gaining any kind of verifiable supporting evidence for anything supernatural. You'd have to go, okay, here's this thing supernatural way over here. Well, the only way I can explain that is through this other supernatural thing and this other supernatural thing. It has to come back to the natural for us to actually say that it actually is an actual explanation. Otherwise, you're just adding to the list of claims. And that's what we have with theism. Theism, your entire dogmatic religion, is you start off, you're saying that supernatural is real, which I don't know how you're going to get started on that. But then you're also saying that there is this supernatural thing that started everything else. That's deism. Then you're saying this supernatural thing that started everything is continuing to shape and influence and interact with everything. And that you have a written history, or even just an oral history, of this entity's interactions, and you're claiming that it's all true. And that is a monumental thing to say, that you believe it all right off the bat, because now you have to go through, not just show that there's something supernatural, not just show that there's a supernatural entity that created the world, but for every single interaction that you outlined saying that it actually occurred, that each and every single one individually has to be verified with external evidence. You can't just go point to the story that you got that information from and say, that's my proof. Because that is the same thing as saying, I believe because I believe. Because if it's just written in the book and there's no external evidence to support it, you're just saying, okay, I believe because this person that wrote the book believed that it was true. It doesn't work that way. So, first thing I'm going to start with, just to let you guys know, is this book, Skeptic's Search for God by Ralph Muncaster. That was given to me as a Christmas present when my cousin found out that I was an atheist. Yeah, that got a chuckle when I first got it. First I was offended as hell. It was basically a slap to the face. It's different from saying, oh, I'm an atheist. That's a shock. But that's not a slap to the face. That is not intended as being offensive. When I ask for books from notable atheistic authors, which have PhDs in other subjects as well, they don't just post about atheism. They don't write about just atheism. Harvard, Yale, Oxford, professors in Ivy League schools. Those are the ones that I'm talking about. They have other material. They don't have to give me just atheist material. But if you instead give me a book on Christian apologetics, that is a slap to the face. That is basically, you're an atheist? That's essentially what she did to me with that. But I have already read it. It is one of the worst things I ever read. But I'm going to go through this step by step, little by little, to show you exactly why I think that. I was going to go for, let's see here. The Case for Christ, because I have more requests from more family members and friends to go over this one. Or rather, the expanded version. But I was waiting on a couple of friends for that one because I have friends that share the credentials that the author for Case for Christ happens to have, and I have not heard back from them yet, and I want their opinions on the outline given as the table of contents in there before I even start on that one. So to buy them more time to give me a response, I'm going to go through A Skeptic's Search for God, and I hope you guys enjoy. Have a good one.